I want to tell you something before I tell you anything else. I spent the better part of my life being exactly the kind of person who would not believe this story. Not skeptical in the casual way that most people are skeptical, the way that leaves room for the possibility of being wrong, the way that holds its conclusions loosely enough to revise them when the evidence demands it. Skeptical in the specific and professional way of someone who had spent decades studying the human brain and had arrived, through that study, at a conclusion that felt not like an opinion but like a fact established beyond reasonable doubt. Consciousness was a product of the brain. That was it. That was the whole of it. The thoughts you think, the emotions you feel, the sense you have of being a self, a continuous, experiencing self moving through time, all of it was the result of electrochemical activity in approximately 86 billion neurons firing in patterns so complex we had barely begun to map them. Beautiful. Staggering in its complexity. A mechanism so intricate and so elegant that a lifetime of study was not enough to fully comprehend it. But a mechanism. Not a soul. Not a spirit. Not something that could exist independently of the physical structure that produced it. The idea that consciousness could survive the death of the brain was, to me, in those years, not a matter of faith or philosophy. It was a matter of neuroscience. And the neuroscience was clear. When the brain dies, the person dies. Everything else, every near-death experience ever reported, every vision of light and love and beings of impossible radiance, every account of tunnels and reunions and the overwhelming presence of something divine, all of it had a neurological explanation. Oxygen deprivation. The release of endorphins under extreme stress. The brain's last desperate attempt to make meaning out of its own shutdown. Beautiful stories. Deeply meaningful to the people who experienced them. Neurologically explicable. I had explained them myself. To patients. To families. To students in lecture halls at Harvard Medical School, where I had spent years as a neurosurgeon and academic teaching the very mechanisms that produced these experiences. I had done it with compassion. I understood that these experiences were real and significant to the people who had them, but I had done it with the confidence of someone who believed he knew what they were. I did not know what they were. I know that now. What I know now, after everything that happened in November of 2008, is that the framework I had built over decades of education and practice and research, the framework that placed consciousness firmly inside the skull and nowhere else, was not wrong in the way that minor errors are wrong. It was wrong in the way that a map is wrong when it insists that the territory it is describing does not exist. I had a map that said certain things were impossible. And then I went to those places. And came back. My name is Eben Alexander. I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the adopted son of a neurosurgeon father who I loved and admired and whose professional path I eventually followed. I attended Phillips Exeter Academy, then UNC Chapel Hill, then Duke University School of Medicine. I trained at some of the finest medical institutions in the world. I performed thousands of brain surgeries over a career that spanned more than 2 decades. I published peer-reviewed research. I taught at Harvard. I was, by every measure available to me at the time, a man who understood the brain. I was also, in those years, a man who was quietly broken in ways I had not fully admitted to myself. I had been adopted as an infant. That fact had lived in me for my entire life as a low-grade question I had never found a satisfying answer to. Not an acute wound exactly, I had loving parents and a full life, but a persistent undertone. A sense of something unresolved at the foundation of my own story. Who was I before the story my family told about me began? Where did I come from? Was I wanted? Was there someone, somewhere, who thought about me? I had a wife, Holly, who I loved. I had children. I had a career that was the fullest expression of everything I had worked toward. And underneath all of it, running quietly like a current I had learned to live with rather than address, was this question I could not answer and this wound I had not healed. I was not, in any meaningful sense, a man of faith. I had been raised in a family that attended church, and I had absorbed enough of the cultural framework of Christianity to be conversant in its language. But belief, real belief, the kind that reaches past intellectual ascent into the place where you actually live, had never taken root in me. The more I understood about the brain, the more the gap between the scientific account of human experience and the religious account of it seemed to widen rather than narrow. I could respect faith. I could appreciate its function in human life. I could see what it gave people and understand why they held it. I could not share it. I was a scientist. And science, as I understood it then, had a different account. November 10 of 2008 began like any other Monday. I woke early. There was a slight headache behind my eyes, not unusual, not alarming, the kind of thing a busy professional in his early 50s dismisses without much thought. I lay in bed for a few minutes in the particular way of someone who is physically present but mentally already at work, running through the day's obligations, organizing the hours ahead. And then the headache changed. This is the moment I return to often. Not because it was dramatic, it was not dramatic yet, not in any way I could have recognized in the moment, but because it was the last moment of my old life. The last moment I was the person I had spent 54 years becoming. The last moment the map I had built was still the map I was using. The headache intensified in a way that was qualitatively different from anything I had experienced before. Not more painful exactly, though it became that, but different in its nature. As if something fundamental was changing in the physical structure behind my eyes. As if the mechanism itself was beginning to fail. I made it downstairs. I remember the cold of the bathroom floor against my back when I could no longer stand. I remember Holly's face above me, the specific and devastating transition on her face from concern to alarm to something beyond alarm that I recognized even in my diminishing state as the face of someone who understood that what was happening was serious in a way that ordinary concern was not equipped for. I remember the seizure. And then I remember nothing. Because what happened next, what was happening in my brain while my body seized on that bathroom floor and while Holly called 911 and while the paramedics arrived and while I was rushed to Lynchburg General Hospital, was something that my entire professional life had told me was neurologically impossible. My neocortex was shutting down. Not damaged. Not impaired. Not functioning at reduced capacity. Shutting down. The outer layer of the brain, the structure responsible for language, logic, memory, consciousness, the entire architecture of what we call a self, was being destroyed by a gram-negative bacterial meningitis so aggressive and so rare that the attending physicians, when they reviewed my case later, struggled to find comparable cases in the literature. The bacteria were eating my brain. And according to everything I had spent my career studying and teaching and believing, according to the map I had built over 54 years of education and practice, a brain in that condition cannot produce experiences, cannot generate visions, cannot access anything, cannot be anywhere other than the darkness of its own shutdown. According to my map, I was nowhere. According to what I know now, I was somewhere so real and so vast and so full of a love so intelligent and so specific that the word somewhere barely begins to contain it. I was not nowhere. I was more somewhere than I had ever been in my life. And what I found there did not just challenge my framework. It destroyed it completely. And then it replaced it with something so much larger and so much truer that I have spent every day since trying to find words adequate to describe what I now understand about the nature of consciousness, the reality of God, and the specific and personal love that underlies every moment of every human life, whether we are aware of it or not. I am aware of it now. And I want to tell you everything. I want to take you somewhere most near-death accounts do not begin. I want to take you to the darkness. Not because the darkness is where the story ends. It is not. Not because the darkness is the truth of what I found. It is not that either. But because I think the darkness is important. I think it is the part of this experience that most people skip over in the telling because it is uncomfortable and because the light that comes after it is so much more compelling and so much easier to describe. But if I skip the darkness, I am not telling you the truth. And the truth, the full truth, including the part that frightened me and the part one did not understand, is the only thing worth telling. When my neocortex shut down, I did not go anywhere. That is the only way I can describe the first phase of what I experienced. There was no tunnel. There was no light. There was no sense of leaving my body or looking down at it from above or moving towards something. There was simply nothing. Not the nothing of sleep, which carries its own particular quality of unconscious rest. Not the nothing of anesthesia, which I had experienced professionally and understood neurologically. A different kind of nothing. A nothing that was itself a presence. A nothing so complete and so absolute that the word nothing does not quite capture it, because nothing implies an absence, and this felt more like a substance. Like being submerged in something that had no qualities at all, no light, no dark, no up, no down, no self to register any of it. I did not exist. And yet something registered it. That paradox, the paradox of a consciousness that was present enough to experience its own absence, is one I have spent years sitting with. It does not resolve neatly. It does not fit inside the neurological framework I had spent my career building. A brain with no functioning neocortex should not be able to register anything. Should not be able to experience the quality of its own darkness. Should not be producing anything that a later, recovered self could access and describe. And yet here I am describing it. This phase lasted, I have no way of knowing how long it lasted in objective time, time having ceased to function as a reliable framework for me at this point, but subjectively it felt like an eternity. Not an eternity of suffering exactly. An eternity of absence. Of being reduced to something so minimal that the word I barely applied. And then something changed. Not dramatically. Not with a sudden explosion of light that some accounts describe. Gradually. The way dawn arrives, not as an event but as a process, a slow and almost imperceptible accumulation of something where there had been nothing. The darkness began to have texture. To have depth. To differentiate itself into something more complex than pure absence. And I became aware of movement. Slow, rhythmic movement. A pulsing. Like being inside something alive, not alive the way a body is alive, with its specific and localized vitality, but alive the way a vast and ancient organism is alive, with a pulse so slow and so deep that you feel it more than hear it. A heartbeat the size of the world. I have described what came next as the realm of the earthworm's eye view. I know that is a strange phrase. I know it does not sound like the beginning of a transcendent experience. But it is the most accurate description I have been able to find for the quality of that place. A subterranean awareness. Dim and organic and deeply strange. Roots and darkness and the slow movement of things that live underground, away from light, in the patient and unhurried way of organisms that have no need of the sun. I was aware. But barely. I was present. But minimally. I had no language, no memory, no sense of being Eben Alexander, neurosurgeon, Harvard professor, husband, father, adopted son. None of the framework of a self. Just awareness, raw, minimal, directionless awareness in a place that was dark and strange and ancient and alive in the particular way of things that have been alive for a very long time. I do not know how long I was there. I know that in the physical world above me, in the ICU at Lynchburg General Hospital where my body lay in a coma, that my physicians were already beginning to regard with the particular quiet despair of experienced clinicians who understand that some cases do not resolve favorably. Days were passing. My wife was sitting beside my bed. My sons were being brought to see me. My colleagues were reviewing my charts with expressions that communicated, to those who knew how to read them, that the prognosis was not good. Day 1 passed. Day 2. Day 3. The bacteria continued their work. And in the place where I was, in the dark and pulsing underground of wherever my consciousness had gone, I remained in that dim and minimal awareness, neither suffering nor at peace, neither present nor absent, suspended in something I had no framework to understand. And then the light came. Not gradually this time. Not the slow accumulation of dawn. Something broke open. From above, and I use that word understanding that above and below were not functioning as reliable spatial coordinates in that place, but something that felt like above, something that felt like the direction that light comes from, something opened. And through the opening came a light so fundamentally different from the dimness I had been suspended in that the contrast was almost physical. Almost a force in itself. And with the light came a sound. Music. I want to be careful here because the word music is going to immediately generate in your mind a set of associations that are not adequate to what I am describing. When you think of music, you think of something organized, notes and rhythms and harmonies arranged by a composer or a performer into a sequence with a beginning and an end. Something that exists in time. Something that starts and stops. What I heard was not that. What I heard was something that music points toward the way a finger pointing at the moon points toward the moon. The finger is real. The pointing is real. But the finger is not the moon. The music I heard in that place was not composed, was not arranged, was not performed. It was the closest I can come. It was the sound that existence makes when it is fully and completely itself. When nothing is held back. When every frequency that has ever existed is present simultaneously and in perfect harmony, not because someone arranged them that way, but because that is their natural state when they are released from the constraints of a physical world that can only process a tiny fraction of what is actually there. I thought later, much later, when I had language again and memory and the ability to reach for scripture, of Psalm 96 verse 1. Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord all the earth. I had read that verse before. I had heard it preached. I had nodded at it with the polite appreciation of someone who finds religious poetry aesthetically interesting but not personally relevant. Standing in that opening light, hearing that sound, I understood for the first time what new song meant. Not a song that had not existed before. A song that could not be heard from inside the ordinary constraints of physical existence. A song that was always playing. That had been playing since before the universe began. That will be playing when the last star goes dark. A song that existence itself sings to its maker. I was hearing it. And it was pulling me upward again, upward as a direction that felt true even if it was not spatially reliable, out of the dim underground place, through the opening in the darkness, toward the light that was growing larger and warmer and more present with every moment. And then I arrived somewhere. And everything changed. The underground was gone. The dimness was gone. The slow pulsing organic darkness was gone as completely as if it had never existed, not replaced by its opposite but simply no longer relevant, the way a bad dream is no longer relevant the moment you wake from it. What surrounded me now was so fundamentally different in its nature that the contrast did not feel like a change in degree. It felt like a change in kind. Like the difference between a photograph of a fire and a fire. Between a description of water and the experience of swimming. I was somewhere real. More real than anything I had encountered in 54 years of physical existence. More real than the operating rooms I had spent thousands of hours in. More real than the lecture halls at Harvard. More real than the faces of my wife and my children, the faces I had looked at every day of my adult life and believed, with the complete confidence of a man who trusted his perceptions, were the most real things available to him. More real than all of it. And the realness was not frightening. It was the most welcoming thing I have ever experienced. I arrived in what I can only describe as a vast and luminous landscape. Not a landscape the way Earth has landscapes, not constrained by horizon or weather or the particular limitations of a planet with specific physical laws. A landscape that seemed to extend infinitely in every direction without losing any of its specificity. I was aware of extraordinary beauty of colors that, as with every witness of that place I have since spoken to, exceeded the visible spectrum available to physical eyes. Of a quality of light that was not reflected from any surface but emanated from within everything, from the landscape itself, from the air itself, from whatever I had instead of a body in that place. And I was not alone. And I was not alone. There was a presence beside me. Not behind me. Not ahead of me. Beside me. The way someone walks beside you when they want you to know they are with you. Not leading. Not following. Present. And emanating from that presence was something I can only describe as love, not the word but the thing the word attempts to describe. The actual substance of it. The reality of it. A love so specific and so intelligent and so directed at me, at whatever I was in that place, stripped of every credential and every achievement and every framework and every defense, that the specificity of it was almost overwhelming. I did not know who this presence was yet. I would learn. But in that first moment of arrival, before the knowing, there was only this. A love that knew me completely. A love that had been present for every moment of my life whether I had been aware of it or not. A love that was not conditional on my belief in it or my worthiness of it or my ability to reciprocate it. A love that simply was. And in the presence of it, every argument I had ever constructed against the existence of God, every carefully reasoned position, every peer-reviewed paper, every lecture hall confidence, did not collapse dramatically. Did not explode. Did not require refutation. It simply became irrelevant. The way a debate about whether the sun exists becomes irrelevant when you step outside on a clear morning and feel it on your face. I was feeling it on whatever I had instead of a face. And I knew, with the certainty that only direct experience produces, that this was not a hallucination. Was not the dying brain generating comfort for itself. Was not oxygen deprivation producing endorphins that felt like transcendence. A hallucination is produced by a brain. My brain, the neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for generating experience, was not functioning. Had not been functioning for days. Was being consumed by bacteria at a rate that my physicians were documenting in clinical notes that I would read later with the particular strange feeling of reading about yourself from the outside. The experience I was having was not being produced by a brain. It was happening in spite of the absence of one. And that single fact, that single, verifiable, medically documented fact, is the crack in the foundation of everything I had built my professional life on. A crack so fundamental and so complete that the structure above it did not crack. It came down. And in the rubble of everything I had believed, standing in a light more real than anything I had ever seen, accompanied by a love more specific than anything I had ever felt, I did the only thing available to me. I surrendered. Not to defeat. Not to confusion. To something so much larger than my previous understanding of reality that surrender was not a loss but an expansion. A becoming larger rather than a becoming smaller. A release of something that had always been too tight in exchange for something that fit perfectly. I surrendered to the truth. And the truth was this: God is real. Not as a theological position. Not as a cultural inheritance. Not as a comfort mechanism or a philosophical framework or a community organizing principle or any of the other functions that the scientific mind assigns to religious belief. God is real. The way gravity is real. The way mathematics is real. The way the love of a parent for a child is real, not because we can measure it but because we know, with a certainty that precedes and survives every argument against it, that it is there. God is real. And God knew my name. I need to tell you about the girl on the butterfly wing. I know how that sounds. I know that to a certain kind of mind, the kind of mind I had for most of my adult life, a phrase like that is already categorizing itself. Already finding its place in the mental filing system under things that sound like dreams or hallucinations or the products of an overactive imagination under extreme stress. I know that mind well. I lived inside it for decades. I know exactly what it does with phrases like the girl on the butterfly wing. I am asking you to hold that mind loosely for a moment. Not to abandon it. Not to replace it with something uncritical or credulous. Just to hold it loosely enough that what I am about to describe can arrive before the filing begins. Because what I am about to describe is the most important thing that happened to me in that place. And it involves a girl I had never seen before. A girl I did not know existed. A girl whose face I would not recognize until months after I returned, months after I had already described her in detail, in interviews, and in writing, before I had any way of knowing who she was. I will get to that. But first let me tell you where I was. The landscape I had arrived in the vast and luminous place I described at the end of the last part of this account, was not static. It was alive in the specific and active way of something that is continuously in the process of being itself rather than simply existing as a fixed state. There was movement everywhere. Not chaotic movement. Not random. Movement with the quality of purpose, the way a river moves, or the way a piece of music moves, with direction and intention even when you cannot see its destination from where you are standing. There were beings. I want to be precise about this because precision matters when you are describing something that will inevitably invite skepticism. Not vague presences. Not undifferentiated masses of light. Beings, with specificity and individuality and the particular quality of personhood that makes a being recognizably themselves rather than interchangeable with any other being. I was aware of them as distinctly as I am aware of the people in a room I have walked into. Specific. Present. Each one radiating the same quality of love that permeated the entire atmosphere of that place, but each one radiating it in a way that was distinctly their own. And they were joyful. Not joyful in the performed way of people at a celebration who are demonstrating their happiness. Joyful in the structural way, the way that joy is sometimes not an emotion you are having but a condition you are in. A state of being so fundamental that it is not separate from you but is you, is the quality of your existence in that moment, is what you were made of rather than what you were feeling. That was the joy I perceived in those beings. And it was contagious in the most literal sense, not contagious the way a mood is contagious, subtly and over time, but immediately and completely, the way stepping into warm water is immediately and completely warm. I was in it before I had time to decide whether to be in it. I was full of it before I had processed what it was. And then I became aware of something moving toward me. Not one of the multitude of beings. Something more specific. More directed. Moving toward me with the particular intentionality of something that has been waiting for this moment and knows exactly what it is. And as it came closer, I became aware that it was not one presence but something more complex, a presence within a presence, a specific individual within the larger atmosphere of love and light, the way you can become aware of a particular voice in a room full of music. She was writing, and I used that word understanding that writing is not quite the right word, that the relationship between her and what was carrying her was more intimate and more integrated than writing implies. She was part of a wing. A vast and iridescent wing that moved with the slow and deliberate grace of something that is all the time in the world because time, in that place, was not the constraint it is here. The wing was not a bird's wing. Not an insect's wing exactly, though the iridescence reminded me of a butterfly's wing, that particular quality of color that seems to come from within the surface rather than being reflected by it. It was enormous. It was beautiful in a way that made every beautiful thing I had encountered in 54 years of physical existence seem like a rough approximation of beauty rather than the thing itself. And on it, looking directly at me, was a young woman. She was not old. Not young in the way of a child, she had the quality of someone who had arrived at the fullest expression of themselves, which in that place did not correspond to any particular physical age but simply to a quality of completeness. Of being entirely and radiantly herself. She had high cheekbones. Dark eyes that held a warmth so specific and so personal that I felt, in the moment our eyes met, that she had been waiting for me. Not waiting in the passive way of someone who has nothing else to do. Waiting in the active way of someone who has something specific to give and has been holding it carefully until the right moment. She looked at me. And without words, in the direct and complete way that communication worked in that place, bypassing language entirely and arriving as understanding rather than information, she gave me something. A message. 3 things, communicated simultaneously, each one complete and certain and impossible to misunderstand. The first was this: you are loved and cherished. Dearly. Forever. I want to stay with that for a moment because I think we hear those words loved, cherished, forever, and we process them the way we process familiar phrases that have been repeated so many times they have worn grooves in the language, and we slide through them without fully registering what they mean. So let me try to tell you what it felt like to receive those words not as language but as direct transmission of reality. It felt like being told the truth about yourself for the first time. Not a comforting truth offered to make you feel better. Not a generous reframing of who you were. The actual truth. The truth that existed before you were born and would exist after you died and had nothing to do with anything you had done or failed to do or believed or doubted or built or broken. The truth about what you were at the most fundamental level of your existence. Loved. Cherished. Dearly. Forever. Not conditionally. Not approximately. Not subject to revision based on subsequent performance. I had spent 54 years believing, at some level I had never fully examined, that love was something you earned. Something you maintained through continued worthiness. Something that could be withdrawn. It was the inheritance of a childhood in which the foundational question of whether I was wanted had never been fully answered. It was the quiet current running under everything, under the achievements and the credentials and the career, the current that whispered that the love available to me was conditional in ways that made it feel slightly unsafe to fully receive. In that moment, that current stopped. Because what she gave me was not conditional love. Was not love that required my continued worthiness. Was not love that had an edge or a limit or a condition attached to it anywhere. It was love that was simply a fact about the universe. As fundamental and as impersonal, not impersonal in the cold sense but impersonal in the universal sense, the way gravity is impersonal as any law of physics. You are loved. That is not an opinion. That is not a feeling. That is not a religious position. That is what the universe is made of. I thought later of 1 John chapter 4 verse 8. The verse that says simply, God is love. Not God is loving. Not God loves. God is love. The substance of Him. The nature of Him. The thing He is made of and the thing the universe is made of because the universe is made of Him. I had read that verse before. I had noted it as beautiful religious poetry. Standing in that place, receiving what that girl gave me, I understood it was not poetry. It was physics. The second thing she communicated was this. You have nothing to fear. Again, words that are familiar. Words that appear in the Bible 365 times, one for every day of the year, as if the repetition itself is making a point about how difficult this truth is for human beings to receive and how persistently it needs to be offered. Do not be afraid. Fear not. Do not fear. 365 times. I had never fully received it. Not because I had not tried. Not because I had rejected it. Because the receiving of it requires something that is very difficult to manufacture from inside a human life, the direct experience of the love that makes the fear unnecessary. You cannot talk yourself out of fear with logic. You cannot argue yourself into fearlessness with theology. What removes fear is not a better argument. What removes fear is an encounter with the thing that makes the fear irrelevant. I had that encounter. In that place, fear did not exist. Not because it had been suppressed or overcome or reasoned away. Because the conditions that produce fear, uncertainty about whether you are loved, uncertainty about whether you are safe, uncertainty about whether the universe is fundamentally hostile or fundamentally benevolent, those conditions simply did not exist. They had no purchase. They had nothing to attach themselves to. Because the love was so present and so complete and so unambiguous that there was no gap in it for fear to enter. You have nothing to fear. Not as reassurance. As fact. I thought of Isaiah chapter 41 verse 10. Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. I had heard that verse in church services I had attended more out of cultural habit than genuine engagement. I had noted it without fully receiving it. In that place, being held in that love, I received it completely. I am with you. Now was with you. Now will be with you under certain conditions. Am. Present tense. Continuous. not dependent on your awareness of it or your worthiness of it or your ability to feel it on any given day. The third thing she communicated was the most difficult to describe and the most important to receive. There is nothing you can do wrong. I want to be careful here because I know how that sounds. I know that to a certain kind of theological mind it sounds like an abandonment of moral accountability, like a permission slip for irresponsibility. That is not what it was, and that is not what I understood it to mean. What I understood, in the direct and complete way that understanding arrived in that place, was something more subtle and more profound than that. It was this: you came here to learn. Everything you have done, every failure, every wound you inflicted, every moment you fell short of who you wanted to be, was part of the learning. Not excused. Not irrelevant. Not without consequence. But held inside a love so complete and so patient that no failure was beyond its capacity to work with. No wound was beyond its capacity to heal. No darkness was beyond its capacity to redeem. The universe is not keeping score in the way you fear it is. The universe is trying to teach you something. And it will keep trying with infinite patience, with infinite creativity, with a love that does not exhaust itself or run out of approaches, until the teaching is complete. I thought of Romans chapter 8 verse 28. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. All things. Not some things. Not the easy things. Not the things that are already going well. All things, including the failures, including the darknesses, including the moments when the map you built over a lifetime turns out to be wrong and the territory it was failing to describe turns out to be more vast and more real and more full of love than anything the map had room for. All things. I received all three of those gifts from that girl on the butterfly wing. And then she showed me something else. Something about the nature of God that I have spent years since returning trying to find adequate language for. Something that the mystics of every tradition have been pointing toward for millennia and that the scientists of my generation had been, without knowing it, approaching from the other direction. Something that I believe is the most important thing I was shown in that place and the thing most needed in the world I came back to. I was shown that God is not a being among other beings. Not the largest or the most powerful or the most intelligent being in a universe of beings. Not a being who exists alongside the universe and occasionally intervenes in it. Not a cosmic authority figure dispensing reward and punishment from a position of external judgment. God is the ground of being itself. The source of existence. The reason there is something rather than nothing. The consciousness within which all other consciousness exists the way fish exist within water, not separate from it, not independent of it, not able to exist without it, but also not dissolved into it. Distinct within it, held by it, made of it. I thought of Acts chapter 17 verse 28. In Him we live and move and have our being. I had read that verse before. I had processed it as theological metaphor. In that place I understood it was not metaphor. It was the most precise scientific statement I had ever encountered. In Him we live. In Him we move. In Him we have our being. Not near Him. Not because of Him. Not with His permission. In Him. The way fish are in water. The way light is in the sun. The way love is in God. I was being held in the ground of all being. I was being shown, with a clarity and a completeness that no laboratory and no lecture hall had ever offered me, the answer to the question that underlies every question ever asked by every human being who ever drew breath. Why is there something rather than nothing? Because love required it. Because the nature of love is to give itself, to overflow, to create space for something other than itself to exist, and then to pour itself into that space without reservation and without condition. The universe exists because God is love, and love by its nature creates. The universe is sustained because God is love, and love by its nature holds what it creates. The universe is redeemable because God is love, and love by its nature never abandons what it holds. Everything I had spent my career studying, every neuron, every synapse, every electrochemical process in every brain I had ever operated on, was not evidence against God. It was evidence of God. The mechanism was real. The science was real. And underneath the mechanism, giving it its existence, holding it in being, loving it into continued reality with the same love that had been directed at me since before I was born. God was real. More real than the mechanism. More real than the science. More real than the map I had built to navigate a world that turned out to be infinitely larger than the map had room for. I was undone. And I was more myself than I had ever been. There was one more place I was taken. I have described the landscape, the vast and luminous realm where I arrived after the darkness, where the beings moved in their purposeful joy and the music was the substance of the air, and the girl on the butterfly wing gave me the three gifts I have spent every day since trying to adequately receive. That place was real. More real than anything I had encountered in 54 years of physical existence. But there was something beyond it. Something that the landscape itself seemed to be oriented toward. The way a river is oriented toward the sea, not consciously, not by decision, but by its nature, by the direction everything in it flows. Everything in that place was oriented toward something. Every being, every quality of light, every note of the music that was woven through the atmosphere. All of it pointing. All of it moving. All of it in relationship to something so fundamental and so immense that the landscape itself, as vast and as luminous as it was like the outermost ring of something whose center was still ahead. I was taken toward the center. Not by the girl this time. She remained where she was, present, radiating the warmth of the three gifts she had given me, watching me go with an expression that I can only describe as the expression of someone who knows what you are about to encounter and is joyful on your behalf in the specific way of someone who has already been there. I moved, or was moved, the distinction having become meaningless, toward the center. And the closer I came, the more everything that I thought I knew about the nature of reality revealed itself as partial. Not wrong exactly. Partial in the way that a description of water is partial compared to the experience of swimming. In the way that a map of a country is partial compared to standing in it. True as far as it went. Not going far enough. The center was, and I am going to use a word that I know will sound religious to some people and philosophical to others and mystical to others, and I want to be clear that I am not using it in any of those ways, but simply because it is the most accurate word available. The center was God. Not God as a figure. Not God as a personality situated somewhere in the landscape the way a king is situated in a palace. God is the ground. God is the source. God is the reality within which everything else, the landscape, the beings, the music, the girl, the butterfly wing, the three gifts, the darkness before all of it, my own consciousness, existed the way a dream exists within the dreamer. I did not see God. I want to be precise about that because I think precision matters here more than anywhere else in this account. I did not see God the way you see a person or an object or even a very bright light. What I experienced was more like, and every analogy I reach for is inadequate, but this is the closest I can come, what I experienced was more like being known by something so vast and so complete and so intelligent that the knowing of it was itself an experience. Like being read by something that understood every word. Like being heard by something that had been listening since before you had words. I was in the presence of something that knew me completely. Not Eben Alexander the neurosurgeon. Not Eben Alexander the Harvard professor. Not Eben Alexander the adopted son or the husband or the father or the skeptic or the man who had spent his career explaining away experiences exactly like the one he was currently having. Not any of the versions of me that I had presented to the world or hidden from it or been proud of or ashamed of. Me. The thing underneath all of those. The thing that had existed before any of those versions were assembled and would exist after all of them were gone. That thing was known. Completely. Without remainder. And the response to the complete knowing of it was, I keep returning to this because I keep failing to find a better word: love. Not love as an emotion. Love as a fundamental force. Love is the reason the universe exists and the reason consciousness exists within it and the reason I was here in this place having this experience rather than simply ceasing to exist when the bacteria began their work on my neocortex. Love is the answer to every question. I thought of the Gospel of John. Not a specific verse at first, but the opening of it, those words that have been read at the beginning of more church services than I can count. Words so familiar that they have almost lost their capacity to shock. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God. And the Word was God. I had read those words as a cultural artifact. As beautiful ancient language that meant something important to people for whom such language was meaningful. Standing in the presence of what I was standing in the presence of, I understood that John was not writing poetry. John was doing his best, with the tools available to a first-century human being trying to communicate something that exceeded the capacity of first-century language, to describe exactly what I was experiencing. In the beginning was the Word. Consciousness. Intelligence. Love. The thing that existed before the universe and that the universe was an expression of. The thing I was in the presence of. The thing that knew my name. And the Word was with God. Present with the Source. In relationship with the Source. Not separate from it but not dissolved into it either. Distinct within it. The way I was distinct within it in that moment, not lost, not absorbed, not ceasing to be myself, but held within something so much larger than myself that the distinction between inside and outside had become less important than the reality of the holding. And the Word was God. Not a lesser thing in the presence of a greater thing. The thing itself. The love itself. The ground of being itself. I had read those words 100 times. I had never understood them until that moment. I do not know how long I was in the presence of that center. Time had become so thoroughly irrelevant as a framework that the question of duration did not arise. What I know is that what happened there, what was given to me there, what was shown to me there, what was done to me there in the most fundamental sense of done, changed the architecture of everything. Not just my beliefs. Not just my framework. The actual structure of what I was. I was different when I left. Different in the way that something that has been held in a fire is different from something that has only heard about fire. Different in the way that someone who has seen the ocean is different from someone who has only seen photographs of it. changed by direct contact with something real, changed in a way that no subsequent argument or evidence or pressure could undo, because it was not based on argument or evidence or anything that argument or evidence could reach. It was based on experience. And then, gradually and with a reluctance I could feel in whatever I had instead of a body, I became aware that I was moving away from the center. Not falling away. Not being expelled. Moving away in the way that you move away from something when you understand that the moving away is part of the plan. That it is not the end of the relationship but a change in its form. That what you have received in the presence of the thing does not require the continued presence of the thing to remain real. I had been given something. I was carrying it back. And the carrying back was the point. The landscape receded. The beings receded. The music receded, not stopping, not ending, but fading in the way that the music of a place fades when you leave it, becoming something you carry as memory rather than something you are immersed in, but no less real for the fading. The girl on the butterfly wing was the last thing I saw before the light began to diminish. Her face. Dark eyes. High cheekbones. That expression of specific and personal warmth that had been there from the first moment I saw her. I did not know who she was. I would find out. The light dimmed. The warmth thinned. The reality I was moving through became less luminous and more dense and more constrained with every moment, the way a diver feels the pressure increasing as they descend. And then there was a threshold, not visible, not dramatic, not announced, a threshold that I crossed, and on the other side of which was something I recognized. Physical existence. Weight. Limitation. The particular heaviness of a body that has been through something catastrophic and is still in the process of deciding whether to continue. Pain not acute, not localized, but present as a general condition, as the background radiation of a body in crisis. The smell of a hospital. The sound of machines. And voices. My son's voice. Somewhere close. Saying something I could not quite parse. And then more clearly, Dad. Dad, can you hear me? I opened my eyes. The ceiling of the ICU at Lynchburg General Hospital. White. Fluorescent lit. The specific unremarkable ceiling of a room designed for function rather than beauty. I stared at it for a long moment, this ceiling that was the least beautiful thing I had looked at in what felt like forever, and felt, beneath the weight and the pain and the confusion of re-entry, something I did not expect. Gratitude. Not just for being alive. Not just for the faces of my family that were now appearing above me, Holly, my sons, but particular relief on their faces that I recognized as the face of people who had been waiting for something they were not sure was coming. Gratitude for this. For the ceiling. For the weight. For the particular heaviness and limitation and imperfection of physical existence. For the fact that there was something here to come back to. For the fact that the love I had been immersed in for however long I had been gone had sent me back to this specific life with these specific people for reasons that I did not yet fully understand but that I trusted, with a certainty I had never possessed before, were real. My physicians were stunned. I want to be specific about this because I think it matters. Not pleasantly surprised. Not cautiously optimistic. Stunned in the specific way of experienced clinicians who have developed, over years of practice, a calibrated sense of what outcomes are possible in given cases and who are confronted with an outcome that falls outside that calibration. The bacteria that had attacked my brain, Escherichia coli gram-negative bacterial meningitis, is among the most aggressive and most lethal forms of bacterial meningitis known to medicine. The mortality rate in cases as advanced as mine is extremely high. In the cases that survive, the neurological damage is typically severe and permanent. The kind of damage that does not recover. The kind that you adapt to and manage and learn to live around but do not reverse. My brain recovered completely. Not partially. Not approximately. Not to a functional level that represented the best possible outcome given the circumstances. Completely. To the level of function that had existed before the bacteria began their work. The neurosurgeon who had spent decades operating on human brains. The Harvard professor who had lectured on the very mechanisms that had been under attack. The man who had built a career on the precision and the reliability of a mind that the bacteria had been systematically destroying for 7 days. That mind came back. And it came back carrying something it had not had before. My physicians had no neurological explanation for the recovery. They documented it carefully, the way physicians document things that exceed their frameworks, with the precision and the thoroughness of people who understand that the record matters even when the record does not fit the theory. They could tell me what had happened to my brain. They could not tell me why my brain had recovered the way it had. I could tell them. But I waited. Because what I had to tell them required something I did not yet have. It required the piece of the story that would transform everything from an extraordinary personal experience into something verifiable. Something checkable. Something that a skeptical mind, the kind of mind I had spent my career cultivating and the kind of mind I still respected and still possessed, could test. That piece came several months after I returned. I had been adopted at birth. I knew this. I had known it my entire life, and I had carried it the way I described earlier, as a low-grade question that had never been fully answered, a persistent undertone beneath the surface of a full and busy life. In the years before my coma, I had made contact with my biological family. My birth parents had been young and unmarried when I was born, and they had made the decision that seemed right to them at the time. I had learned that I had biological siblings. I had begun the slow and complicated process of incorporating this information into my understanding of myself and my story. What I had not learned, what no one had told me, what I had no way of knowing, was that I had a biological sister who had died before we could meet. Her name was Betsy. She had died years before I made contact with the biological family. She was gone before I knew she existed. And I had never seen her face. Had never seen a photograph. Had never been told her name or given any description of her whatsoever. Several months after I came home from the hospital, my biological family sent me a photograph. It was a photograph of Betsy. I looked at it for a long time. High cheekbones. Dark eyes that held a warmth so specific and so personal that I felt, in the moment I looked at them, that she had been waiting for me. The girl on the butterfly wing. My sister. She had been waiting for me in the place I went when my brain shut down. She had found me in the darkness and brought me to the light. She had given me the 3 gifts: you are loved, you have nothing to fear, there is nothing you can do wrong, with the specific authority of someone who had been carrying them for me since before I knew she existed. She had been my guide through the most important journey of my life. And I had not known her name. I sat with that photograph for a long time. And I wept in the way that a man weeps when something he has been carrying without knowing he was carrying it is finally, completely, set down. The question I had carried since birth was there someone who thought about me, Did I matter to the people who had made me answered? Not by words. By a face. By a girl on a butterfly wing who had come to find me in the dark and had not left my side until I was safe. I was wanted. I had always been wanted. Not just by my biological family. Not just by the people who had adopted me and raised me and loved me in the particular and imperfect way that human love is always particular and always imperfect. By something so much larger than any of that. By the love that is the ground of all being. By the consciousness that holds the universe in existence. By the God who knew my name before I had one. I had spent 54 years building a map that said certain things were impossible. The map was wrong. And I was more grateful for that than I had ever been for anything. I am a neurosurgeon. I want to start there because I think it matters where I start. Because everything I am about to tell you, every conclusion I have reached, every claim I am going to make about the nature of consciousness and the reality of God and the specific and personal love that underlies every moment of every human life is coming from a man who spent his career on the other side of this argument. A man who understood the brain as well as any person alive understands it. A man who had every professional and intellectual reason to explain away exactly the kind of experience he had and who cannot explain it away. I cannot explain it away. Not because I stopped trying. I tried. In the weeks and months after I returned from the hospital, as my brain recovered its full function and my professional mind came back online with the same precision and the same rigor it had always operated with, I tried every explanation available to me. Every neurological mechanism that could theoretically produce hallucinatory experience. Every drug-induced state. Every known effect of oxygen deprivation on brain function. Every documented case of complex experience during altered states of consciousness. None of them fit. Not because I was not looking carefully. Because I was looking more carefully than I had ever looked at anything. With the specific and trained attention of someone who understood the mechanisms in question better than almost anyone alive. With the particular motivation of a man who had built his professional identity on a framework that the experience I was trying to explain threatened to dismantle completely. None of them fit. Because there is one fact about my case that no neurological explanation can accommodate. One fact that stands at the center of everything and refuses to be explained away no matter how sophisticated the attempt. My neocortex, the structure responsible for generating conscious experience, for producing the visions and the emotions and the sense of self that characterize every known form of altered state experience, was not functioning. Not impaired. Not functioning at reduced capacity. Not functioning at all. The bacteria had shut it down. Completely. Verifiably. Documented in clinical notes by physicians who were watching it happen in real time. A flat, featureless, inert piece of biological tissue that was producing nothing. That could produce nothing. That the entire framework of neuroscience as I understood it said was incapable of producing anything. And in the condition of its complete non-function, I had the most vivid, the most coherent, the most detailed and the most real experience of my entire life. That is not a paradox that resolves with a better neurological model. That is evidence. Evidence of the thing that the greatest minds in human history have been pointing toward from every direction, from philosophy and from theology and from mysticism and from the kind of physics that operates at the edges of what measurement can reach. Evidence that consciousness is not produced by the brain. that the brain is a receiver of consciousness rather than its source. That what we actually are, underneath the credentials and the achievements and the fears and the frameworks, is something that exists independently of the physical structure it currently inhabits. Something that does not end when that structure ends. Something that goes somewhere. I know where it goes. I have been there. And I want to spend the rest of this account telling you what I found there that I believe you need to hear. Not as a neurosurgeon making claims that exceed his expertise. As a witness. As someone who was taken to the place that consciousness goes and came back carrying something that was given to him specifically to share. The first thing I want to tell you is about the nature of God. Because I think the picture of God that most people carry, the picture assembled from childhood religious education and cultural osmosis and the particular ways that the concept has been used and misused throughout human history, is smaller than the reality. Not wrong exactly. Small. Like a photograph of the ocean is not wrong but is smaller than the ocean. The God I encountered was not a being who existed somewhere in the universe and occasionally intervened in it from a position of external authority. The God I encountered was the ground of the universe. The reason there is something rather than nothing. The consciousness within which all other consciousness exists. The love that is not something God has but something God is, the substance of Him, the nature of Him, the thing He is made of and the thing the universe is made of because the universe is an expression of Him. I think of Psalm 139 verses 7 through 10. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even though your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. Where can I go from your spirit? The answer, I discovered, is nowhere. Not because God is watching from a distance and tracking your location. Because God is the location. Because the presence of God is not a thing that exists in space the way objects exist in space. It is the space itself. The ground of everything. The reason there is anywhere to go at all. You cannot flee from God the way you cannot flee from the air. You are in Him. You have always been in Him. And He knows you, not the version of you that you present to the world, not the version you are most proud of, not the version you most wish you were. He knows the real you. The you underneath everything. The you that existed before you were assembled into the person you have spent your life becoming. That you is known. Completely. Without remainder. And the response to the complete knowing of that you is love. Not tolerance. Not forgiveness offered reluctantly from a position of moral superiority. Love. The active, specific, intelligent, particular love that knows exactly what you need and exactly what you are and meets both with the same unlimited patience and the same unlimited warmth. That love is not something you have to earn. It is something you are already inside. The second thing I want to tell you is about consciousness. Because I believe this is one of the most important things I was shown and one of the most important things I can offer to a world that is increasingly torn between a scientific account of human existence that leaves no room for meaning and a religious account that too often asks people to abandon their critical minds at the door. You are not your brain. You are not the electrochemical activity of 86 billion neurons arranged in patterns of staggering complexity. That activity is real. The brain is real. The mechanism is real. I spent my career studying it and I have not stopped believing in its reality or its importance. But you are not it. You are the consciousness that the brain receives. The awareness that flows through it the way music flows through a speaker. The speaker is real. The mechanism of the speaker is real. And when the speaker breaks, the music stops coming through it, but the music does not stop existing. It goes somewhere else. It plays somewhere that does not require the speaker. When the brain dies, consciousness does not die. It goes somewhere. I know where it goes because I went there when my brain stopped functioning. And what I found there was not diminishment, was not confusion, was not the scattered fragments of a self trying to hold itself together without its biological substrate. What I found was expansion, clarity, a quality of awareness so far beyond what the brain had ever allowed me that the brain, in retrospect, seems less like the thing that produced consciousness and more like the thing that was limiting it. The way a narrow doorway limits the space of a vast room, the doorway is not the room. It is just the opening you can currently see the room through. Death is not a narrow doorway closing. It is the walls coming down. I think of 2 Corinthians chapter 5 verses 1 through 4. For we know that if the earthly tent we live in is destroyed, we have a building from God, an eternal house in heaven, not built by human hands. Meanwhile we groan, longing to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling, because when we are clothed we will not be found naked. For while we are in this tent we groan and are burdened, because we do not wish to be unclothed but to be clothed instead with our heavenly dwelling, so that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. So that what is mortal may be swallowed up by life. Not by death, by life. The transition that we call death is not a diminishment into nothing. It is an expansion into more, into the fullest version of life available to a consciousness free from the constraints of a physical body in a physical world. Into the place I described, the vast and luminous landscape, the beings in their purposeful joy, the music that is the substance of the air, the love that is the ground of everything. Into home. And the people who have gone there ahead of you are not gone. I need you to hear that clearly. The people you have lost are not in darkness. They are not in pain. They are not diminished versions of themselves waiting in some gray anteroom for the story to continue. They are in the most alive and most real place that exists. They are more themselves than they ever managed to be here. And they are held in the same love that held me, the love that knows them completely and loves what it knows without condition and without limit. They are not far from you. The distance between where you are and where they are is not the distance it feels like from inside the grief of losing them. What feels like absence is not absence. What feels like separation is not separation in any ultimate sense. The love between you and the people you have lost is not interrupted by death. It is not stored somewhere waiting for reunion. It is present, continuous, unbroken. Love does not require physical proximity to remain completely intact. I know this because Betsy found me. In the darkest place I have ever been, in the underground of my own unconscious mind, in the dim and pulsing nothing of a brain that had stopped producing experience, she found me. My sister who died before I knew she existed. Who I had never met and never seen and whose face I could not have recognized. She found me and she brought me to the light and she gave me gifts that I am still unwrapping years later. Love found me in the dark. Love will find you in the dark too. Whatever darkness you are in right now, whatever the shape of it, grief or fear or the quiet and persistent darkness of a life that feels smaller than it was supposed to be, of a question that has never been fully answered, of a wound that has been with you so long you have stopped expecting it to heal. Whatever darkness you are carrying into this moment, Love is already there. Not coming. Already there. Present in the darkness the way Betsy was present in mine, waiting, specific, holding something for you that was prepared before you needed it and will be given at exactly the right moment. You are not alone in the dark. You have never been alone in the dark. Now I want to speak to you directly. If you are someone who has spent their life on the side of the argument I used to be on the side that says consciousness is a product of the brain and death is the end of the self and the universe is a magnificent and beautiful mechanism that has no author and no purpose and no love underlying it, I want to tell you something from the inside of that position, from someone who held it as carefully and as rigorously as it can be held. It is not big enough. Not wrong in the way that false things are wrong. Not big enough. The universe you are describing when you describe a universe without God is a real universe. The mechanism is real. The mathematics is real. The extraordinary complexity and beauty of the physical world is real. But it is the photograph of the ocean, not the ocean. It is the map, not the territory. It is the speaker, not the music. The music is real. I have heard it. And it is playing for you whether you can currently hear it or not. It has been playing since before you were born. It will be playing when the last atom of your physical body has returned to the earth. It is playing right now in the background of whatever you are doing, whatever you are thinking, whatever argument you are constructing against the possibility of its existence. It is playing. And the day will come, I do not know when, I do not know in what circumstances, I do not know whether it will be at the end of a long life or in the sudden and catastrophic shutdown of a brain that a neurosurgeon will later struggle to explain. The recovery of the day will come when you hear it. And when you hear it you will recognize it. Because some part of you has always known it was there. If you are someone who believes but who carries that belief alongside a doubt that will not fully quiet, the doubt that asks in the small hours of the night whether any of this is really true, whether the love you are told is there is really there, whether the people you have lost are really anywhere, I want to tell you something from the other side of that doubt. The doubt is understandable. And the love is real anyway. Not real in spite of the doubt. Real in a way that the doubt cannot reach. Real in the way that the sun is real whether you can currently see it or not. Real in the way that Betsy was real, waiting in the darkness, holding something for me, present long before I knew she existed. The love does not require your certainty to remain completely intact. It is intact. It has always been intact. And if you are someone who is afraid of death, of loss, of the darkness that comes to everyone eventually, I want to tell you what I found on the other side of the most complete darkness I have ever experienced. I want to tell you not as a man of faith making a theological argument but as a neurosurgeon making an empirical report. On the other side of the darkness there is light. On the other side of the silence there is music. On the other side of the absence there is a presence so complete and so specific and so full of love for you in particular, for you, not for people in general, not for humanity as a concept, for you, the specific and irreplaceable individual who is hearing these words right now, that the darkness, in retrospect, is not what it seemed. It is not the end of something. It is the last moment before the beginning of something so much larger and so much more real and so much more full of everything you have ever hoped was true that the hoping itself will seem, in that moment, like the most reasonable thing you have ever done. Hope. It is the most rational response to the evidence. I am a neurosurgeon. I have spent my career demanding evidence. And the evidence I have, the evidence of 7 days in a coma, of a brain that was not functioning, of an experience that no neurological framework can accommodate, of a face I described in detail before I knew whose face it was, of a recovery that my physicians documented with the careful thoroughness of people confronting something they cannot explain, that evidence points in one direction. God is real. Consciousness survives death. Love is the ground of everything. And you, exactly as you are, with everything you have done and everything you have failed to do and everything you fear about yourself and everything you hope about the universe, you are known completely by something that has been present in your life since before you were born and will be present in your life long after your brain stops functioning. You are loved dearly, forever. I know this not because someone told me, because I was there, and what I found there found me first, in the darkness, before I knew to look for it, before I believed it was possible, before I had any framework for it at all. It found me, and it will find you. If this testimony has moved something in you today, if something in the account of a skeptical neurosurgeon who went to the place his entire career told him did not exist has reached a part of you that needed reaching, there are more stories waiting for you here on this channel. More witnesses. More people who crossed to the other side and came back carrying something that was meant to be shared. Each one a different voice. Each one a different life. Each one saying, in their own way, from their own experience, the same thing I am saying to you now. God is real. You are loved. And the darkness is never the end of the story. Subscribe and stay close. Because every week we bring another voice home. And every voice is saying the same thing. You were never alone. Not for a single moment. Not ever.